Good afternoon and welcome to the Monday 10th of January 2022 Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. Welcome to all the councillors on the panel, the Cabinet member, all the officers who are attending the meeting and any speakers. So this session is on public viewing on YouTube. And my name is Karen Warrington and I am the chair of the panel. I'll now call out the names of the other members of the panel and just ask them to confirm that they are present for the minutes. Councillor Dogood.
Present.
Councillor Elliott.
Present.
Councillor Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Hodge.
Present.
Councillor McPhee.
Present.
Councillor Furs.
Yeah.
Councillor Singleton.
Present.
And Councillor Davis.
Present.
Lovely, thank you very much. I've mentioned that there are officers present who will be introduced individually as we make our way through the agenda. Please can I remind all members and officers to keep background noise to a minimum and to only speak one person at a time and to not speak over others. Please mute your microphones when not speaking and then unmute when I invite you to speak. Please indicate if you wish to speak by using the chat facility on Zoom, by typing MIS, which means may I speak, and they can then call you to speak in turn. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the agenda? No? Great, lovely. Are there any apologies for absence, Mark?
No, Chair, you're all here.
No. Great, lovely. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? So any disclosable pecuniary interest or other declarable interest to any item of business on the agenda? There is no urgent business agreed by the chair in item 4. So I would like to now move on to item 5, public statements, and we have David Redswell. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. Yeah, the reason I want to speak today is obviously policy and resources are very important when it comes to public transport in Bath, North East Somerset and the West of England Combined Authority and North Somerset Council, which obviously we're in partnership with. Well, it's no secret that we've still are fighting a difficult battle to maintain bus services citywide and countywide. But it is being successful that the Mayor of the West of England has managed to find some extra money to maintain some vital rural links, particularly the 178 from Radstock and Midsummer Norton through to Keynsham and Bristol, to Timsbury and Marchbury, and that's to be welcomed, and also to maintain the link out of Bath to Warminster with a connection onwards to Salisbury. Obviously vital regional links for Bath and North East Somerset Council. Of course, we've still got to keep the pressure on Baroness Fear and Grant Shapps to maintain COVID-19 bus operator grants. Without that grant, First Group, Stagecoach, HCT, Pickford, Fairsaver, run by Daniel Pickford, are maintaining vital bus services across the area. So to keep the city's congestion down, to improve public transport and air quality, we need to make sure we have a decent bus service in and around the district. So there are a couple of points I want to raise. It's obviously important government money comes through COVID-19, but it's also important that Bath and North East Somerset Council's budget, South Gloucestershire's budget and Bristol City Council's budget maintain the money for supported bus services, because the Mayor at present, although I know he wishes to move forward with North Somerset as a member of the Combined Authority, does not have preset powers for the function of public transport, which of course is his legal function, no longer this authority's. So we obviously need to maintain the passporting of money. So that is extremely important. On the issue of infrastructure, then it's very important that we maintain bus shelters. I'm disappointed to see we've got a large number of vandalised bus shelters in Odd Down, South Down and in Twerton around the city at the moment. And we obviously need to maintain those bus shelters jointly with the Mayor. and also make sure we prosecute via the Avon and Somerset Police and Mark Shelford anybody caught vandalising infrastructure belonging to the West Midlands Combined Authority and Bath and North East Somerset Council. On the bus station, Bath is unique in the fact it's got its travel centre closed and has no information point for the travelling public. And I've made the point again, and I'll make it again formally to the council, that we ought to be sitting down with Doug from the MD of First West of England, with I think now calls themselves Tourism West, which used to be Bristol and Bath Tourist Board separately, to see if we can find a use for that bus station travel centre for guides and for the information to be given out by staff on welcoming people to Bath. And I've spoken to Doug and Alex Perry at First, and they would be interested in doing that sort of deal, not just with Baines and Bath bus station, but also with Bristol bus station and with their small bus station down in Wells and Somerset. So it's just finding out whether that's Kevin Guy leading on that with Dan Norris and Marvin Rees, or who leads on that sort of discussion. But I understand tourism is very much connected with the West of England. And of course, for the people of Bath and North East Somerset, Bristol, South Gloucestershire, North Somerset, tourism is vital to the economy of the South West, vital to the economy of the city, and it's vital to the heritage estates and making sure. So to find no information point in the city is pretty poor, really. But I say that about Bath, but if I went to Bristol today, you wouldn't find an information point either, because the same tourist boards closed their point in Bristol. So we do need to get on top of this one. Going forward to after April, we need to make sure that COVID-19 bus operator grant and the work that Vera's doing as local MP, and I believe also Jacob Rees-Mogg and the other MPs across the district, by that I mean the Wecker area and North Somerset, are doing to try and maintain that grant is very, very important, similarly with local rail. The one policy I would challenge, and obviously I'm pleased that we're looking at corridors to Rasdot, Midsummer, Nottingham and Peasdown, and from Wells through the A37 through Clutton and through Templecombe and Whitchurch and up through Pensford and into Hengrove and Bristol, is the need for interchanges. I was very disappointed to see that we were suggesting that Cherry Gardens, which is between Bitton and Bristol, passengers from Bath will change at Cherry Gardens from 19 bus to 45 bus with no through buses to Bristol. I don't find that a safe interchange point. It doesn't have CTV. It doesn't have good
David, I think we might have lost you. David, are you right? We seem to have lost David, and unfortunately, I didn't start timing that, so he's probably had his or close to his 3 minutes. So we'll see if I can catch up with him later, and if he's got anything else.
I'm back just to say, I don't know why I lost it. I just was going to finish off by saying,
yeah, Cherry Gardens,
the interchange policy reviewed. I was very pleased that we managed to kill dead the interchange policy of changing buses in Keynsham at Ashton Way. I know everybody thought it was a joke when I showed a picture of a bus stop and a bench on Facebook, but that was the reality of the situation. And I know we need to work hard on these interchanges. So all I'm asking is interchanges. Chris Major and the officers at Wecker need very, very carefully to look at that interchange policy, along with floating bus stops and cycleways, which also don't sit well together, I believe, on an equality situation. But these interchange points aren't fit for purpose. We haven't built a lovely purpose-built bus station in Keynsham or an interchange in Radstock or Midsummer Norton. If we did have, I would be less concerned for passenger safety and less concerned for people. But as I sit on the police community partnership with British Transport Police and with Mark Shelford's Avon Somerset Police, I would not recommend any of those interchanges as being safe for passengers, and I'm sure that would be shared by the Avon and Somerset Police. So those are my remarks. I just make the point to Baines, because you are still collecting the money on behalf of the West of England Combined Authority. I do wish to see all these people working for the West of England, all these transport officers, and not some of them working at Yates, some of them at Keynsham, and some of them in North Somerset. I do think that's something we've all got to work towards, sorting out an integrated transport authority with North Somerset as full member. But those are the points I want to make today. Right. And I do say thank you to all the work done by the MPs and councillors to get where we are in maintaining a level of bus services in the district at present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I think tourism probably comes under the cabinet. Richard Samuel under the his economic development remit. So
it's Councillor Romero's remit.
Oh, it is, right. Okay,
Yeah.
So it's Councillor Romero's remit, but we can pass that message on to Councillor Romero. Lovely. Thank you very much, David. Always nice to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay. Right. Item 6 is the minutes for the 29th of November. Does anybody have any comment on the minutes? Would anybody like to propose them as a true record? So Councillor McPhee, and a seconder, please. Councillor Singleton. Oh, it's Councillor Singleton. Sorry, I saw your hand go up first. Right, so item number 7 is the Cabinet member update. So Councillor Samuels, may I ask you to give your update, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Well, I'll leave the budget itself aside because that's on the main thing on the agenda, but and obviously that's taken up a lot of work. So there's a few things I want to mention. The first is the Millstone Quarter master plan work is more or less complete now. We will be going to public consultation with the final proposals towards the end of this month, so in a few weeks' time. I have asked that a briefing for all councillors is held so that all councillors can see what this important piece of work is proposing. And then there'll be a period of public consultation on the proposals in the master plan, and we'll be welcoming public input into that before the Cabinet adopts the final version of this in the early summer. The second thing I wanted to say that I've had quite a bit of involvement in is the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, which is a major funding initiative by the Department for Transport, which will be managed through WECA. This council currently stands to receive somewhere in the order of £200 million over the next 5 years. But the sting in the tail is that we have to provide between 15 and 20% of matched funding to that. And that will be brought together from a variety of sources. All the WECA authorities are required to do this. So this is going to be on the Cabinet's agenda shortly. And it's a major transport initiative that obviously we've been working out financial aspects of as well. Just before Christmas, the government announced a further version of business grant schemes for hospitality and hospitality-related businesses. We didn't receive the guidance before Christmas, and officers have now got that guidance, and they're working that up into a local scheme within the parameters set by the Treasury. So that is underway. Leader and I had a value for money interview with Grant Thornton, who are carrying out an audit exercise as part of the audit of the council's value for money processes. I haven't seen a report out of that yet, but that was some work that was done just before Christmas. And the last thing to mention is as part of the budget preparation, we ran a budget seminar in December, and we have launched the public facing side of budget engagement at the same time, and that work is underway as well. The last thing I wanted to say is that just picking up on one of the points David Redswell made, there is no change to supported bus services funding proposed in the budget. That remains as it is. But as everybody will appreciate, relative to the scale of bus operation within Bath North East Somerset, it's a relatively limited pot for specific circumstances, but there's no change to the budget in relation to that. It's as it's been in previous years. So, Chair, I think that's all I want to highlight. So I'm happy to take any questions from members of the panel.
Does anybody have any questions the Cabinet member? No? Okay. All right then. Shall we then move on to item 8, which is the main item on our agenda, which is the draft budget. May I invite Andy Rothery to present the report, please?
Chair. So before I get started, I'm going to ask Councillor Samuel Sources to say a few words on the paper.
Thank you, Andy. So we're going to do this in 2 parts. I'm going to introduce the background to the budget, and then Andy will go on to cover some of the ways the budget has been built up, and we will then have obviously an opportunity for the panel to ask questions and clarify things later. So essentially the background to this budget was set by the medium-term financial strategy, which we published in September. And the budget process since then has been to refine the assumptions within the medium-term strategy. As time has gone on, we're able to do that. So we're clearer now about likely levels of income in 22-23. And we've been able as well to spend time on the more detailed parts of the budget build as we've gone through that process. The high-level message really to the panel is that the pretty tough financial environment which we're currently experiencing is going to continue into 22-23 and most likely into 23-24 as well, because there has not been a full recovery to normal levels of income, which as members of the panel will know, substantially supports the provision of our council services. Heritage Services is still operating below its previous pre-pandemic capacity. Commercial income remains depressed, so the woes of businesses who are our tenants continue, I'm afraid. And although we are seeing a slightly more optimistic position than we were forecasting maybe a year ago, the only one that has perhaps slightly surprised us, and in some ways this is not a good thing, is that car parking income has exceeded our expectations. And in terms of climate emergency and air pollution objectives, the greater use of cars and cars parking is not a particularly desirable outcome. But there is a financial benefit for the council because the parking income is above what we were expecting. So that pretty harsh environment continues. At the same time, we are seeing a bounce back for service requests, particularly in adult and children's social services. And these were depressed during the 12 months from 2020 through to midsummer this year. But we are now seeing strong levels of service requests in those areas, and that's putting quite a lot of pressure on both of those areas' budgets. So that's the kind of high-level background. The government's settlement figures were announced in December. We've had to spend some time working through those. They don't always all come in at the same time, but I think now we're reasonably clear what the levels of external funding the council is going to get. Disappointingly, the Chancellor ruled out a reform of local government finance in his autumn statement, and we can now not expect any change to local government funding arrangements until after the next general election, whenever that turns out to be. So in other words, we will not see any reform of business rates or local government grant funding rates before 2025-26 at the earliest. That obviously is hugely disappointing because it means that the hand-to-mouth planning that we have continues. And this year's settlement figures, again, are 1 year only, so they don't enable us to plan into subsequent years. So that's that background. Going into the beginning of the budget, I mean, we've also had to accommodate quite a lot of external pressures and things that are moving that we have relatively little control over. So these will be things such as pay inflation, pension costs, levels of inflation in the economy. And as all members will know, this is beginning to rise to much higher levels than we've been used to in recent years. And that has a direct implication for the council. And in certain areas, particularly those related to construction costs and construction employees, we are seeing quite an inflation in pay in those sectors. So the council is having difficulty recruiting some specialist roles onto its workforce. A lot of work has been done this year to kind of try and rebase our budgets to reflect the actual demand that the services are seeing. So when you look through the appendices, you will see quite a lot of rebasing. And what that means in essence is that we're trying to match the resources we've got to the demand we're experiencing. So to give you an example of what's been a positive shift, but nevertheless a big shift, is that we're seeing much higher levels of waste and recycling generation, which means that has to be handled, that has to be managed. And the volumes of the tonnages coming through that service are very high at the moment. And that we think that's a pandemic response. More people are recycling, which is obviously a very good thing. The last point I'd make really is really around those demographic changes. We are trying to set down the planning for the future. So just sticking on that waste and recycling item, we have just let the contract for Pigsash Lane, and that will represent a major investment by the council into the future, reflecting the need to manage waste and recycling production from households, the increased number of households that we expect to take in the next Sustainable Development Strategy period, so over the next 15 to 20 years. So there's a big investment within the budget for that. So I think I'll draw a line at that point. Andy is now going to start from the technical table, which is the red and blue one, which hopefully you've all become very familiar with. And then we'll take questions after he's finished together. So over to you, Andy.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. So if panel members have the report in front of them, as Richard said, I'm kind of walking through some of the numbers that gives the 5-year budget view. I think a couple of points to remind people the numbers are still draft, but they have incorporated all of the information from the provisional settlement. So they are getting much closer to being finalised for the budget report that will go to Cabinet and then on to full council in February. I think probably the key things to really note is that we have got a significant growth requirement just to run the council next year. That's 18 million of funding into the council to keep core operations going, and that's really due to some of the points that Councillor Samuel made around ongoing inflationary pressures that are significant now, and we are predicting there will be risks next year. Activity demand is going up, so core services such as social care, but also waste, there's been higher activity in those areas that require investment. And also, I think generally across all services, we are seeing increased cost in terms of COVID, where there are shortages in the workforce. There's additional cost for agency. So to keep running core council operations whilst we're coming through the other side of a pandemic, it is costing us more money, and that's had to be recognised in the budget to make sure, as Councillor Samuel said, we're rolling our budget forward on what it's costing us now to run the council. So it's really important to get those numbers right over the next couple of years. But what you will see through the graph is the next couple of years in terms of the budget gap are difficult, but things do start looking a lot more positive, and that's in the main due to our predictions that our income levels will get back to pre-pandemic levels from around 24-25. And also with our projections in housing growth, we're seeing increase in the council tax base. So there's 2 really difficult years in terms of us having to live within our means and find significant savings to balance the budget. But things do look a lot more manageable from years 3 to 5. I think that covers the key points I wanted to make on the first 2 tables. I think also to note for the panel, one thing I was really keen to do, building on feedback from last year's engagement, is making sure that the way we put the documents together for the budget are as clear as possible in terms of the makeup of the net budget. So going on to the next table, this shows the start position in terms of our 21-22 net budget at 130.07 million, and the budget requirements for 22-23 is 136.21 million. In terms of that movement, the 2 appendices show the funding requirement and also the savings and income plans that total around 18 million funding requirement, 11.87 of savings plans. I think that really helps people see the makeup of the budget, but also with the appendices, the detail behind it in terms of where those core funding requirements are at a summary level in the table that's in the main report, but then at a more detailed level in the appendices, and also the same with the savings. So with the table in the main report, you can see significant costs around contract inflation, also pay and pension, and also demographic growth. As we go through the budget every year, we do have a number of areas where we do need to do budget rebasing, where things are costing more money in particular service areas, and that's really informed by the quarterly forecasting we do. So we ensure that our forecasts and our future year's budgets are aligned so we can come up with the best forecast in terms of cost requirement for running the council in the future year. Another key point to note on the financial table is the funding of the budget requirements that shows our council tax projections and also business rates. They're the two core funding streams of the net budget. And also as we go through this year and next year, the budget does highlight a reliance on one-off funding. And that's really taken into account the depressed income levels we've got that will come back in future years, and also refinance any use of one-off money. I think they're probably the key points I want to make on the main report. I think the final point to note is that there's also the capital annex that shows new and emerging capital schemes. So these are additions to the capital programme. It's not the whole capital programme. The full capital programme will be published as we go, as we edge a bit closer to completing the budget documents. I'm hopeful that we'll bring that to the scrutiny meeting at the end of January. On that note, I think that covers everything from my presentation.
Right, okay. So can I now open that up to the panel? Does anybody have any questions? Winston, sorry, Councillor Dogood.
Yeah.
Go forward.
Just on the reserves, I did ask you last time about this, Andy, just that commentary on the funding of the budget requirement. If you could just explain where you say reserve transfers 5.22 million, and just clarify, are we in this budget looking at taking out of reserves? Are we holding steady on reserves? And is that a transfer from a restricted reserve into a non-restricted reserve? What does that 5.22 mean?
Thanks, Councillor Dogood. So that's in a way temporary use of reserve. So it's drawing money from our financial planning reserves. This was really sort of set out as we were going through the pandemic and our financial recovery plan, the medium-term financial strategy, because really in recognition of income loss. So it's transfers from reserves into the revenue budget of 5.22 million. And then as we go into future years, I'll just have to get back up the table, there's money going back into reserves. So we're taking money down, but then we're putting money back into the reserve to refinance. So our reserves position stays whole, but it's temporary use in the proposal for 22-23.
So, sorry, Andy, can I just clarify? Is that just purely because of COVID?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Does any of the other panel members have any questions? Councillor McPhee, then Councillor First.
Councillor Samuel, I just wanted to ask really, what would you say if the accusation was made that you've taken your eye off the climate change? Because there's quite a large amount of new capital going, but when you look at it, it doesn't seem to be much climate change, and it seems as though that might have been the casualty.
Well, I'd say it wasn't true. I mean, there haven't been any reductions in those areas. In fact, within the revenue side of the budget, Sophie Broadfield, who's the new Sustainable Development Director, has restructured the service within her section to make it a much stronger section and to enable us to be more effective in terms of climate emergency work, because there were some issues about capacity and some unfilled posts. So there is a lot of work going into that side of the budget. We'd also perhaps appreciate that the work within the planning system to create conditions that enable us to deal with planning applications and with a climate emergency focus to some of those policies, that requires revenue to support it. And that money has been found and put into the revenue budget. So, you may not see big capital schemes, and the nature of capital schemes is that they last over several years. We have tended to pare back the capital this year. This isn't a particularly expansionary capital program, but it maintains the program that we've had there before. And I think probably, if you're thinking about the main things that Bath and North East Somerset can do to contribute to tackling the climate emergency, the two major areas of carbon dioxide emissions are transport and energy loss from homes. And the council is putting an enormous amount of effort into the transport side of that equation, because it's the one we most easily control and can do something about. It's much more difficult for the council to, it's actually impossible for the council to fund any kind of programme to help residents insulate their homes. And that is something that it needs to come from central government, and I'm afraid has been completely lacking so far. There is no programme announced by the central government that will make any difference to energy loss from homes. So, the main effort has gone into the transport work, and that is resourced, and that is on the way.
Very good. Yeah, I mean, and I guess the PICSASH development, you could argue, has a climate component to it.
Well, it will do. That's as you know, representing Keynsham Ward, this is something that's been in the pipeline actually for a decade, and not much progress was made prior to us taking control. But we have brought that project forward. It is now at a point where the contract for PICSASH has been let. And what we will see when that work is completed in the next 12 to 18 months is we will see modern, purpose-built recycling facility that will have a number of features to it that really will make a big difference. So I think, this is all, that will enable us to handle higher volumes of recyclate. And of course, yes, you're quite right, indirectly that does contribute to our climate emergency targets. To be honest with you, it's not going to reduce that much CO2, but diversion from the waste stream is very important, because that's where methane is generated, and that's the problem that we're trying to tackle.
Thank you.
Do other members? Councillor Hodge. Oh, sorry, Councillor first.
I thought you had me next. Yeah.
Sorry,
Thank you.
apologies.
Thank you. Three points really. I'll take point 2 first. I've got 3 points. One about inflation, one about charging infrastructure, and the third one about household recycling. I'll take the second one first, which is following on from the discussion you just had there, Richard, about electrical charging and the infrastructure needed to deliver the government's ambitions. And I know this is probably WECA money for this all new vehicles in 2030 to be electric. You know, although even if we had the money to deliver a number of a significant addition to the charging points, the electrical infrastructure doesn't allow for the supply of those. And most of our residents, and I talk about Bath here, centre of Bath, particularly Kingsmead Ward, most of those residents do not have a driveway or a garage, and most of them live in flats. So how does this council, and one of the answers could well be, this is not a council responsibility, and therefore we have to rely on government to deliver infrastructure for 2030. But how are we going to try to get around this because of our setup of our historic city?
Well, there's 2 parts to answer that question. The responsibility for the electricity grid in Bath and North East Somerset is Western Power Distribution. Western Power Distribution operate a 5-year capital funding model, and I think I'm right in saying their next 5-year period starts from 2023. The upgrading of the Bath grid is under consideration by them, but and I understand it will require a new substation at some point somewhere in Bath. So the current position is that unless that upgrade is undertaken, the grid will probably not be able to cope with a wholesale switch from fossil fuel engines to electric vehicles. That's the first issue. I'm actually reasonably confident that Western Power Distribution probably will make that move, but quite possibly towards the end of that funding period. And the reason I say that is that the investment that they will they will put in will have to be repaid by the use of the grid. So I think that's where you'll see it. There'll be a business case, technical business case beneath this. But the second problem is actually far more problematic, because in a practical sense, if you live in the centre of the city, as I do and many other residents do, creating space for on-street electric vehicle charging is extremely difficult. It can only be done by removing parking spaces at volume. There is the issue already, some residents are trailing cables across the pavements, and that's dangerous, needs to be stopped. But we have at the moment, we have no option for those residents. They either have to go to some of the car parks that have charging points, or they can't acquire an electric vehicle. So it's a really difficult practical problem about how we do this. The on-street charging will need to be fast charging, because one of the things you can't do is to leave a car on trickle charge for 8 hours. And, you know, that's 3 vehicles a day that could, over 24 hours, that could get charged. Clearly, that's not practical. It's got to be fast charge. And that's where the grid upgrade comes in. But there's a major cost involved here because, I mean, I have seen some authorities have combined lamp standards and charging points, and that does seem like quite a neat solution. But you only have to walk around the city to know that not every lamppost is at the curbside. So this is, you know, there are some very practical technical problems here that need to be addressed. And actually, I think it's a piece of work that one of our scrutiny panels could do, is to work with highways officers to see, well, what is the solution to this?
Yeah, thank you for that. No, that's a very thorough answer. Thank you for that, Richard. And it was, I think it was more highlighting that it's not an easy fix, and there are big problems. 2 other points, if I may, Chair. One quick is about the inflation. I know, Andy Rothery, I raised this last month, about whether 2% is a little bit underestimate, and I know you touched upon it. You know, nationally, everyone's talking about 5%. Depends which month that it falls in, but are we being a bit too ambitious? Maybe is the word, saying 2%, or should we be putting more into the budget?
That's the first. So we, in terms of across our services, we've held inflation at 2%, but we have put in corporate contingencies for over 2% inflation risk, because we are recognising that when it comes to retendering, they may return costs that are above normal inflation. So we are recognising that. So that's why there is a fairly significant contract inflation line that does take us over 2%, but I can't remember the specific number, but it's in excess of was around the 2 million mark. It's been held corporately for that risk.
Thank you for that. Excellent, thank you. And finally, Chair, if I may, so it's just a quick one. Household recycling. Now, I think Richard, you mentioned at the very beginning of this of your presentation that household recycling rates have gone up, which is good, but it's got to be understood within the context that there's more people working from home, and therefore waste or recycling through their business where they would normally be in their offices or whatever. They're at home. So it's where it would have been undertaken by private contractors and charged equivalent in that way through private waste collection. Now it's household waste collection that the general taxpayer is picking up that recycling. So just an observation really, but that's my take on it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Furze. Can I go down to Councillor Dogood? I'm going to work down the chat.
I've already spoken. It was a point on the budget, on the reserves. Great. Thanks, Chair.
Oh, you're in the reserves. Councillor Singleton.
Thank you, Chair. Andy, if I may, picking up on the council tax projections in those figures, it's being widely trailed that there's going to be a serious impact on household budgets in coming months. Does that have a potential impact on council tax projections, or is there a formula which takes account of the likelihood of people's ability to pay and therefore perhaps a shortfall?
Really good question, Councillor Singleton. Our current in-year budget and future year budgets is anticipating that we need to hold within the local council tax support scheme a provision where households won't be able to meet their council tax in full, and also that's something that's been recognised in terms of our welfare support budget for households who outside of council tax are struggling with just meeting ongoing bills. So that's, you know, in terms of signposting, our welfare support team can look at individual cases of hardship.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hodge. Are you there, Councillor? Oh,
yes, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Sorry, that's fine.
Yes,
a couple of questions actually. The first one was about the information for new capital projects, and I just really wanted to feedback. I'm glad we're going to get the whole picture of the existing capital projects, because it's quite difficult to see where schemes have dropped off and how the two sit together. And a couple of things that I was looking back at the last 3 years, and with new capital recommendations in 21-22 for commercial estate refurbishment, we allocated quite a large sum, 800,000, with nothing listed for subsequent years. And yet in this, for 22-23, we do have a plan of significant sums, 300, 500, 500 for the next 5 years. And I just would like to understand how that comes about. If we just reflected that we need that sum each year going forward. And also in terms of consistency and what's in the new capital projects, back in 2021, we had a transport delivery programme with sums assigned to it, 600,000, and then 21-22, 1.5 million. But it's not mentioned again last year or with schemes this year. So does that delivery programme appear somewhere else? And also I was looking at the SIL. This year we've got developer SIL. So is that how you're going to divide up the pot of central SIL monies, or is that or is that the neighbourhood SIL? And neighbourhood SIL is normally bid for, so it's already divided up into different categories. So I didn't quite understand how that comes to be, where it's allocated to green infrastructure, libraries, SEND, and strategic infrastructure. So which proportion of the SIL is that? And then I just had a number of questions relating to the tables of savings, but I'll just go for one of them, and that was in adult portfolio, the budget rebase, the £300,000 budget rebase saving in adult services and council house building. I just wondered where we were finding a saving in that portfolio, on which budget that was. That makes sense. I think we'll stop there. That's enough questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Hodge. Councillor Samuel, I'll go through the commercial estate, capital and transport, if that's okay. Are you okay covering the SIL question around SIL principles?
Yeah, I've signed off the SIL, but it's quite possible this won't have come in through to these papers, but I've signed off the detail of that this morning. The programme, basically, this developer SIL was oversubscribed by demands on it. So we had to do an exercise before Christmas to pare it back. That included some checking that the way that the SIL request was matched to the SIL regulations. And so some have dropped out from that, but we now have a programme, and that will be available for the end of the month, which represents a good match of the SIL that we have. The SIL is dropping, actually. That's the point the planning officers have made to me. So it's not been that easy to match what we had to demands on the programme.
Thanks, Councillor Samuel. Is that okay, Councillor Hodge? Shall I move on to the commercial estate investment?
Yeah, so it does sound like that's the central pot, isn't it? The 80, not the neighbourhood pot. Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So on the commercial estate, you're absolutely right in terms of recognising that annual investments needed. In terms of the current year budget, we recognised to really ensure that units were being brought back onto the market in a timely manner. Investment would be needed of around the 800,000 mark. Now doing a following review, we've recognised it's much more strategic to look at a rolling sum of investment. So as units become vacant, they can go through a process of inspection, identifying where investment requirements are needed, and we approach it as a rolling maintenance budget for the estate. I think that's a much more sensible way, rather than having kind of stop-start budgets where we are at risk of running out. So we run it as a rolling programme. So that's the proposal for the annual amount on commercial estate. In terms of transport investment, large sums in terms of future years proposals, they are being worked up as part of the City Region Sustainable Transport Deal. So in terms of the integrated transport block, that's now being looked at as a component of the CRSTS, and similarly with the highways maintenance block. So the detail is being worked up on those. There's just a lot of work happening at the moment, in collaboration with our neighbouring councils and via WECA, to get the business case to the government departments on the City Region Sustainable Transport. That work's underway at the moment, and we'll incorporate as much detail as we can in the full budget proposal. On the final question, in terms of some of the rebasing, we have got Mandy Bishop in the meeting also. So Mandy, is it okay if you answer the one on the adults rebasing?
Yes, thank you, Andy. I was just having a look, and to answer your question, Lucy, the budget that we've seen activity drop in since 2017 is the physical disability and sensory impairment budget. So that is rebasing of that budget.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mandy.
Okay. that answers all your questions, Councillor Hodge. So can we go to Councillor Hughes, please?
Thank you. I mean, unfortunately, most of my general questions have already been covered. So I just have a more specific question looking at the Appendix 1, particularly to do with parking charges. You know, we're at a time where our tourism and hospitality and retail have been hit very hard, and we seem to be applying a lot of increases to parking, and on a specific point on there, there's also a plan to introduce charging in Midsummer Norton and Radstock. I think our high streets have suffered enough, and we're already struggling with our regeneration. I'm not sure that the timing of this is quite appropriate.
I'll take that. The review of parking charges that we have just concluded and introduced really reflects the fact that a comprehensive review of these charges has not taken place for 8 years. So there were some minor adjustments made during last administration, but this has been a fairly comprehensive look at parking charges. And that is reflected together with the charges that will hit the council's books in relation to residence parking zones, where clearly charges appear. Where those are extended through the Livable Neighbourhoods programme, then there will be a general uplift in the overall parking cost provision. But the question I'd put back is, if you do not raise income from the sources that are available to the council, what services do you cut? Because that's, I'm afraid, that's the binary choice available to the council. Council cannot maintain its level of services unless there is a charge for parking, as we've described, because the other income sources, the heritage services and commercial estate, you know, you've already heard those are already under pressure from the pandemic. So we felt it was appropriate to look at the parking charges and how they operated, and that's why they have been adjusted upwards to reflect the additional income. But it is a binary choice. It's a policy choice at the end of the day. And if you don't do that, you have to cut something else, or you have to raise money from somewhere else. There isn't anywhere else to go.
So when you say that it's a parking charge review, does that mean it's open for consultation and review, or does that mean that it's already been decided without
that already took place extensively through 2021. There was a general public consultation together with the specific statutory consultation on the traffic regulation order, and that took place in the autumn. The consultation on the whole package, that took place, I think, in the summer last year. And parking services have worked extensively on this to make these changes. I mean, for example, one component of that was the hotel and guest houses charges. There was work with the local associations who represent those businesses. And, you know, we've done everything we possibly can to talk to people. Raising parking charges is never popular, but this hasn't been done for those reasons, that many of the charges were out of date and needed to be revised.
But I mean, looking at Midsummer Norton and Radstock specifically, then, where we're struggling with our high streets, our retailers are struggling to bring in another charge. I mean, in an area where we are heavily dependent on vehicles for several reasons, really doesn't seem a fair and just way to penalise them further. I guess that's an observation.
Well, as I said to you, that putting charges on car parking is never popular. From memory, I don't think the charges that were proposed for Midsummer Norton were very large. I don't know if, Andy, you can recall the hourly rate, but it was quite a low hourly rate, I seem to think. I don't have those figures to hand, but we can find
we
them.
can find the exact figures and share them with the panel if that would be helpful.
Well, sorry, but if the amount you're charging is very low, then it begs the question: why bother? Why penalise for such a small return?
Well, I think, Councillor Hughes, the question I'd ask is: can it be evidenced that businesses are struggling because people cannot drive to those centres? The Midsummer Norton Radstock is quite a large area. My guess is that many of the businesses in those areas, the predominant business is very local. I don't think people will be driving into Midsummer Norton to do their shopping. Some will be from the surrounding rural areas, of course, but the majority business would be from local residents. Now, the question that you will know better than I, I'm sure, is the car the only way those residents can get to those places where they need to shop, or are there other alternatives? I mean, it's a very general question.
Absolutely, and those are questions that should have been asked before they impose additional charges. That's a review that should have been undertaken before the charges have been put into this budget.
And what I've said to you is that they were extensively consulted on during 2021 before they were finalised. So that work did take place.
Well, okay, I would dispute that, but okay.
Can I just jump in there? No, it isn't just when you say local. Yes, it is Midsummer Norton and Radstock, but it's also the wider community as well. And there is absolutely no way we could get a bus or other alternative to some of those shops.
No,
specialist cake shops for cake decorating and blah blah blah. You just can't get a bus.
But as Andy Rothery said, I think you'll find that the charges that are proposed are extremely low and are highly unlikely to put people off visiting to do their shopping. It certainly will not be at the level that Central Bath is, where parking is at a premium. There will be nowhere near those.
It just doesn't make sense. I mean, we already have, and I know this is a separate issue, but we've already issues with them trying to add into the partial update the plan to convert the car park into residential. And for the local residents, this will just be seen as a pathway towards that goal.
Okay. So, Councillor Elliott, I think you have a question for Andy.
I do, just a brief one. On the Appendix 1 savings, you've got a risk rating against each of the savings. The only one that's red is the increased income from the sale of Recyclit. We've heard that recycling levels are up. I'm just wondering why that's a red risk, really. Do you have any detail behind that? Why do we think that there's such a high risk to that increased income?
I might get corrected by our Chief Operating Officer on this one, but I think it's red risk because volatility in the marketplace, because there's other councils also generating recycler that drives market behaviours. So it's really to recognise that the price could have fluctuations, so the target could have fluctuations in price.
So
that is correct, Andy. It's about volatility of just the income, what you can sell it for.
It's basic economics. If there's oversupply, the unit price goes down. So if more councils are recycling, more residents are recycling, the unit price of the commodity goes down, and therefore you get less income. So and as both Andy and Maddie Bishop have said, it's extremely volatile, and the market prices move all the time. So that's why it's a risk rating in there.
Sure. Yep. Good. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, I think mine's probably more just an observation. That's on Appendix 1 as well, do with savings. And you'll remember after the Sarah Everidge situation where the women councillors spoke about very much safety. I know one of the savings here is to do with the CCTV. I can see it's to undertake a service redesign, which may be part of what we would have appreciated. but I think some people felt sometimes the CCTV wasn't always as effective as it could be, just through bushes needing cutting back and things like that. So I'm a little concerned that it's looked as a saving, although I see it's down as an amber one, in view of the sort of quite strong views that came to council, particularly from the led by the women councillors, but it did get endorsed by all councillors in the end. But it's more of an observation really, in the way that I hope the saving doesn't mean that the service doesn't jeopardise the issue that we were raising at the time.
Thanks, Councillor Davies. I'm conscious there's also an investment line into CCTV, but I've noticed Mandy Bishop's got her hand up, so Mandy may be able to add a bit more detail.
Mandy?
Yeah, just to reassure. Yeah, thank you, Karen. Sally, just to reassure you, it is a sort of a minor adjustment of salaries. As Andy said, there is also a line on capital investments, and we're very mindful of anything that we do on CCTV, that we're mindful of the women's and girls motion that was put forward as well. So it will have a minor readjustment on salaries. And in fact, there's a real opportunity at the moment with this budget, with the capital investment, to actually give this really important issue more consideration as we move forward as well. And we've made a commitment to liaise with ward councillors and town and parishes as we go through part of that process as well.
Thank you.
So Councillor Hodge, you had another question you wanted to ask or clarification?
So it's just just looking at after Councillor Elliott brought up the savings risk. I was just, so our savings plans are, in terms of value of 11.87, are quite a bit higher than the 2 previous years, and I just wondered what the value, I'm sure whether it's determined the total amber and the total green risk is of that, the proportions of that sum. Has that been of the 11,000? Is that kind of something people have to hand? You know, I mean, one can add it up from the table, but I just wondered what proportion of the 11,000 was rated as amber or green, or maybe that comes in the final report.
Before Andy comes in on that, Councillor Hodge, I think I need to remind you that we had to make nearly 20 million of in-year savings in 2021 on top of the savings already penciled in. So actually, although this is a daunting total this year, and as Andy said, in terms of the longer term picture, you know, there have been much tougher years. This is a challenging total, but is not as much as we had to do in 2021.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Samuel. Just to come in, yes, Councillor Hodge will provide that summary level in the full budget report that will come before the panel at the end of the month.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
So if that's everybody's questions, I just have one quick question regarding the redesign of the dog service. Obviously, we've had some very high-profile issues nationally, and I've had some in my ward as well. So I just would like to add a plea that the dog warden service is given enough authority and responsibility to work with the police to remove dangerous dogs, because that hasn't always happened, obviously in the past, with the very tragic circumstances that we've seen nationally. But I've had some pretty awful situations within my previous ward as well. So I just make a plea that relationship between the dog warden and the police is enhanced with the redesign of the service. Hopefully you can nod your heads. Good, excellent.
Yeah, I'll take that forward.
Great, that's lovely. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I'm sure the residents will as well. So if there are no further questions, are there any other comments that you want to make, Andy? Or shall we move on to your next?
Yeah, not from me, Chair. I think we've covered everything. Thank you.
Great, that's lovely. So we look forward to seeing all the detail on the budget. It's always a glorious part of the calendar year to do that. So Thank you very much for all your input. On item 9, we're moving on to the Community Contribution Fund Progress Report. So that's over again to you, please, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an update report to the panel that gives more detail in terms of how the fund has performed since its launch. So just a reminder, this is the pilot that was agreed for a 12-month period by full council. The fund launched in March. The balance in terms of contributions into the fund is now around the £25,000 mark, but that was in December, so there may be some additional contributions, but that was the amount that was used to assess the applications against. So in terms of donations, by December we'd reached 300 donations. 73% of those were between £5 and £50, and we did also have a couple of very generous donations coming in, one at £1,000 and one at £2,000. So in terms of access to the fund, applications opened in October and closed at the end of November, and we've had 29 applications with a total ask of £52,000. So some decisions are now needed around awarding the £25,000 out to the organisations that applied. So applications covered a range of different areas, from projects looking at investment into mental health, also providing medical supplies to residents and individuals in Bath and North East Somerset, and also targeted support to families, and a number of other areas also. In terms of funding allocations, the applications have been reviewed at the moment, and elected members will be making a decision on funding awards in January. I think they're the key points in terms of where we are. I think in terms of the request to the panel today, it's to note the progress, but I think it would also be good to discuss where we are with the fund as a pilot and maybe think about next steps. So, Chair, I think that covers the key points I wanted to make.
Yeah, so I guess we're, as you say, we're at the end of the pilot, or coming up to the end of the pilot stage. Just going forward, and before I open the debate, what would be the next steps? Can we debate today, make some recommendations going forward, potentially with maybe some options and potentially some constructive feedback, and then would that have to go to obviously cabinet, and would full council have to meet and vote on that as well, because clearly that went through as a motion to look at the pilot, and the motion was to bring it back to scrutiny so that we can watch the progress, as it were.
That's correct, Chair. The corporate panel proposed the pilot to full council following an action given by full council. So I think it would be the right approach in terms of the panel now considering next steps of making that recommendation to cabinet and on to council.
Right. So being a little bit presumptuous, Councillor Singleton, would you like to kick that off? You don't have to, but
I was just about to put MIS in, Chair. No, I think it's been a really interesting pilot as far as one can observe so far. The report brings to our attention that there has been comment about the inability to gift aid, and of course we understand the structural reasons for that. Although my understanding is that it would have attracted more support had there been the ability to gift aid. What has happened at least two people I've spoken to have told me that they wanted to give something to it, but decided instead, because of the inability to attract gift aid, that they've gone to different funds instead. It seems to me that there is an opportunity to tweak the product, if we can use that term, in a way that would make it easier for people to give to, and perhaps draw it to more people's attention. Because although a letter about it did go out in every council tax demand, I think, in the last year, an awful lot of people I've spoken to claim to know nothing about it. So it appears that perhaps the publicity of the initiative wasn't as fulsome or effective as it could have been. And so I just wonder, given that there are a number of members, and I'm sure both on this panel and elsewhere, who've got significant experience of philanthropic trusts and charitable fundraising, whether there is an opportunity to input to a discussion to develop perhaps a slightly different shape for next year. And if so, whether there is still time to do that, or whether we're running pretty tight, given the need presumably to get out with the information to council taxpayers.
Who would like to take that question?
Okay, I'll try my best on a few of those. I think in terms of a pilot and the gift aid issue, I think the bit we've got to recognise in terms of our charitable status, I think we were opening this and also being mindful that all money donated is passported directly out, so cost of administration and cost of setup, there wasn't a budget for it. In terms of ability to get the benefit from gift aid, I think that is something that could be explored, but I just think we do need to be mindful of the setup cost, because it will mean changing our status and mechanism in terms of receiving that money. But I think that's something that it shouldn't be an obstacle as such. I just think we need to be mindful that it may involve some associated costs to set up. And I think Councillor Singleton, on the point about comms, it'd be good if you could feed some of those directly to Sarah Dixon, who's been our lead officer on this, because I think it'd be good for our officer support to think about how we could improve comms if there are areas where we could do better.
Okay.
Councillor Singleton, could you add the forums to that, because they're always a good way of getting out information. Most of the town councils and parish councils and other forum members are there as well, so it does get a little bit disseminated. So
okay,
that'd be great. Thank you.
Could I just come back on that point of gift aid specifically? That one opportunity is to have Quartet Foundation manage the fund, and they charge 10% of the total of the fund as their administration fee, and they can reclaim the gift aid from it, so that there may be no requirement to put forward a budget line, since it would come out of the funds generated by the initiative. And I'm sure there are other people who do similar things.
Yeah, we'll note that point down, Councillor Singleton, in terms of if we reach a point of making the fund permanent, the future administration of the fund could be interlinked into that recommendation.
And also it'd be interesting to know then who would disseminate those funds, and because obviously their criteria might be slightly different to ours, so that would be an interesting factor to take into account as well. Councillor Hodge, I think you had a question.
Yeah, so just because I'm on the assessment panel, and I just wonder whether it might have more to contribute after being through that process, because I think it's a very large document to read of the details of the 29 applications, and after going through that process of trying to make the assessments and feeding back and working as a team, and might have more points to contribute to the pilot. So we haven't got to the final stage pilot, have we, which is really awarding the sums of money. So I don't know whether it'll be enough, you know, after that's done, I think it'll be quite clear what might work better next time. I don't know whether we've got another feedback opportunity after that.
Councillor Hodge, from our side, in terms of setting the budget, I'd say that probably, if this is okay with the chair, a feedback opportunity to maybe corporate scrutiny at the end of this month. Timing would allow incorporation of changes into the proposal to cabinet and then on to full council.
Yeah, I think it might be a pretty full meeting on the 31st, but maybe if we could have a report beforehand that we can read and get our questions through, then that might be, that certainly could be something that we might be able to do. I'll double check with Democratic Services that we've got enough time to do that as well. Is that all right for everybody? Great, lovely. Okay, so thank you. Just want to thank Andy for all the input on the finances, and thank you to Councillor Samuel, as well as the other officers who've contributed to the meeting, so Mandy as well. So we would like now to move on to the work panel, the plan. So if I just quickly go through the plan, and then if anybody's got any items that they would like to add to the plan, I will make a note of those, and then we will look at working those in when we have our work plan meeting. So obviously today we've had our draft budget and the Community Contribution Fund progress report. Next meeting is on the 31st of January, and we will have the council's budget and possibly an update on the Community Contribution Fund and the progress towards the what we should be doing with that. Then on the 28th of March, we will be looking at preparing for the future and the People's Strategy update and the Corporate Risk Register, which I understand, Mandy, you're going to be leading on. Hello?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, sorry. I've got the plan up, so I can't see anybody, so apologies for that. On the 9th of May, we've got customer services standards. On the 11th of July, we've got the emerging digital data and also the procurement policy annual update. The other two items that we have is management of the property estate and the parish charter. So those two items will need a date to go against them. And we've probably got some other items to go on to the to be fitted in at some point in the future. Does anybody have anything else that they might want to? Councillor Degood.
ADL's not on there. We have got a responsibility to look at ADL. It's you know, Donna sorted this out last time.
Yes, she did. Yes.
And it's just a question of it's handy that Councillor Elliott, Chair of Audit, is on this call. And I think Audit's role, and Councillor Elliott, correct me or not, is just to make sure the process is correct on the auditing of the accounts. And I think you've already been through that process, if you could just confirm or otherwise. And then I think it's up to us to look at having, if Audit are okay with the process, that we then look at the business plan, and we haven't got that on the plan. So perhaps Councillor Elliott could just enlighten us.
Audit's role is to look at process and governance. I wouldn't see the audit committee's role as looking at the business plan. I would do that as being this committee's role.
Councillor Elliott, can I just make sure, do you know the timing off the top of your head? Is it April?
Not off the top of my head. Andy may be able to help with that.
Is it the 1st of April is the start of the new financial year for ADL?
Yes.
Right, okay. So you won't, so actually maybe sometime after our July meeting, which probably is sort of September time, that might, we might be able to do it then.
Just a supplementary, when is the business plan produced in the annual cycle, Andy?
Oh, it could be earlier, couldn't it?
Where it's on now, I need to check with colleagues in Aquis in terms of the Aquis board sign off and meetings. So we've got a clearer line in terms of decision making for Aquis to support the business plan and then the shareholder process our end.
Yeah, I'm slightly concerned, Chair, if we leave it till after July. I'm just trying to remember what.
Fair point, yeah.
Because I think it will be a hot subject, perhaps from one of your former colleagues, if no one else.
Okay. Okay, does anybody else have anything that they want to bring up at the moment? Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, if it would be possible in the future, I'd like us to review our processes for public consultations. It just seems that our process for making sure residents are actually aware that consultations even exist seems to be quite poor and quite inadequate. Our process for advertising them seems quite poor. Quite often I'm hearing we've had issues with the partial update consultation. I've got residents telling me they're receiving notifications for the review of the A37 and the A361 review, and they're getting notifications a day before the consultation closes. The livable neighbourhoods consultation, there's been a number this year. I know that with the partial update, I was told that the notification in our area was put in the local library, which is not that busy a place. I'd also like us to understand more about how a public consultation is considered to be valid. How many responses do you need before you know that you've actually got a true reflection of the public opinion? Because if we're not getting enough responses to our public consultations, they cannot really be considered to be a valid view. So just the whole public consultation thing, I'd like at some point to be reviewed.
Actually, Councillor Hughes, I have asked for us to have a look at the process of decision making, and that's partly and public consultation should come partly under that as well. So we should be looking at that at some stage during this year.
Okay, good.
So that's already to potentially be scheduled in, but clearly if that's only a rudimentary and small part of the whole process, then we may need to take that offline and look at it again.
Okay.
But it should be in there already, if that reassures you. Anybody else got any comments to make? Councillor Hodge.
Just really say, can we make sure, I'm sure this is in hand, but before the preparing for the future, in March, that we do have all the metrics, that they come back, because it was quite a lot of work to collect this together. I think that retention and recruitment impact of a change in strategy, and also the transport routes to work information. So it would be a shame to have that meeting and not have the information to go with it.
Yes, because we're looking just to make sure that sort of it overlaps with the climate and emergency panel, but just to make sure that there is that sustainability has been factored in as well. So yeah, and that we're not increasing trips and potentially expenditure as well, isn't it? So it's expenses. Okay. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to? No? Wonderful. Well, thank you to everybody for your participation and contribution today. And I look forward to seeing you on the 31st of January. So closing the meeting at something like 15.